Good evening, everybody. Good evening and welcome to this meeting, which is a hybrid event in person. Delighted to say a great turnout here at the River Court Hotel in Kilkenny, and the event is also being streamed online. It's called Good Governance in Practice, an overview, and that's appropriate enough for this Trustee Week. The event is co-hosted by the Charities Regulator and Volunteer Ireland. My name is Declan Gibbons, and it's Volunteer Ireland who thought it was a good idea that I would chair this evening's event. We'll leave you to judge that a little bit later on. A couple of pieces of housekeeping before we go any further this evening, just to tell you that this event is being recorded, and obviously it's online as well, so if people be aware of that, it's being video recorded and audio recorded as well. And the event will include presentations from a couple of personnel from the Charities Regulator, and then in a little while we will have a panel discussion as well. There'll be lots of opportunities for people to raise questions both in the room and online, and we'd encourage you to do so, because really tonight's event is all about information and getting as much as we can out of that. The speakers this evening are, well, the Chief Executive of the Charities Regulator, Helen Martin, whom we'll hear from in just a moment, and then a little bit later, following her, we'll hear from Thomas Mulholland, who's the Director of Compliance and Enforcement with the Charities Regulator, and I'm sure he'll be telling you how that isn't as fierce as it sounds at all, and we look forward to hearing that. Then later, we'll have an opportunity for a panel discussion. Very appropriately enough, it'll be brought down to local level. We'll have trustees from two charities based here in the Kilkenny area, and we're going to be hearing from two trustees of those for a discussion about governance and, I suppose, the reality of governance at a local level for charities, because a huge proportion of charities, unlike perhaps what we think, are small ones, people tipping away with very small numbers, some without any professional staff whatsoever, and then some very, very large organisations. So hopefully we will get a sense of how those two operate and how they cope with the governance code and with charity status as well. And we really would encourage you to get your questions in. If you're watching online, you can also type in your questions in the chat, and we can they will either be answered in the chat, they will be answered in the chat, and we might also get an opportunity to discuss some of those with our panel when they join us a little bit later on. So that is the format for this evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you get something out of it and that you'll find it worthwhile use of your time this evening. Thanks, as I said, for coming along. It's great to see such a turnout. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker this evening, and that's Helen Martin, the Chief Executive of the Charities Regulator.
So thanks very much, Declan, and thanks for that introduction, and thanks to everybody for making it here tonight. I know that as volunteers, your time is precious. So as Declan said, I really do hope the whole purpose of tonight is to give you some insight into the work of the Charities Regulator, what we do, but also most importantly, I think for anybody here who is charity trustee or is volunteering with a charity, so that you get to hear other charity trustees tell you about their experiences, and maybe that'll resonate with you. You'll think, oh yes, that's familiar, but also as well to make sure that you realise that you're not alone. Sometimes you think you have these questions and nobody else has them, but we're aware of what those questions are, because we've got staff who talk to you every single day of the year, or sorry, most days of the year, through our contact centre, and also by email when you contact us. So we're familiar with the issues, but at the same time, we're always looking for people to share their experiences with us, so that we can make, for example, the guidance that we provide to you, the webinars that we have like this one tonight, as I suppose relevant to you as they can be as charity trustees. So what I'm going to just briefly go through this evening, hopefully this works now for me, is just to explain very briefly around the Charities Regulator. So the Charities Regulator, as you can see, this is our structure up here. So for some of you maybe who are with larger charities, it'll be familiar, because it's basically an organisational structure where we have a board. So I report as the Chief Executive into a board, and the board have all of the functions under the Charities Act. The Charities Act is our constitution, so you'll all be familiar with your governing document. Ours is the Charities Act, and there's a particular section in that sets out our functions, similar to your own main object and the objects that you'd have in your own constitution. And therefore we have to set ourselves up and make sure that we can deliver on what we're supposed to be doing as a statutory body and as a regulator. In the same way as you are a charity and you're delivering on a charitable purpose, and everything that you're doing is around delivering on a charitable and also providing public benefit as well, which is obviously critical when you're a charity. So as you can see there, the board has a number of different committees. Again, that might be familiar to you. If you're a smaller charity, you might not have committees, or you might maybe only have one. Important there is obviously our finance, audit and risk. That'll be familiar to some of you. It's an essential function for any board to have a committee that's really diving into that area to make sure that the board oversees the finances of the organisation and all of the resources to make sure they're being used for our statutory functions in the same way as you use it for your charitable purpose. We also have a Performance Resource Planning Advisory Committee. We have a Regulatory Committee. That's a really important committee. They look at the work that we do on the regulatory side. So for example, if we get a registration and perhaps it's one that we don't believe meets the charity test, we get an application for registration, then that will be considered by our regulatory committee, and then they will make a recommendation to the board as to how the particular case should be dealt with. And they also look at a lot of our guidance documents. We've got external people on that committee and on all of our committees, so that's how we get that kind of external viewpoint. So we're not completely insular, thinking we're doing a fantastic job, but actually missing out on important expertise. And then we have a Charity Services Committee. Some of you may be familiar with that and some of you may not be. That's a committee that actually deals with the older Charities Acts. So there are Charities Acts that are decades before the 2009 Act, and there is a huge amount of work for the charities regulator under those older acts, because what we're dealing with there are older, maybe charitable trusts, older charities that were set up a long time ago. They may not have the powers that they need in their governing document, and therefore they come to the charities regulator to authorise certain things, like maybe a sale of a property, because they don't have the power to do it, and they'll make a certain type of application to us. Similarly, they might be quite old and maybe they want to wind up because, you know, what they've done, they've achieved what they wanted to do, but they might have assets and they might want to transfer those to a charity that has a similar charitable purpose. So it's incredibly detailed legal work, and quite a lot of effort goes into that. And I think it's very much an unseen part of the work that the charities regulator does. But we have a fantastic team there, and also a really, really committed committee. That is not an easy committee to be sitting on, nor any of the committees, I should say, but that is a particularly challenging one, which is why we have a number of legal professionals sitting on it. And then you'll see I'm there in the middle, and we have our Director of Legal Affairs and Registration, and also Thomas, who's with us here tonight, is our Director of Compliance and Enforcement. And we have a number of different units then. We've got our Registration Unit, Compliance and Enforcement. We also have our Communications and Stakeholder team. You would have met a number of them here tonight. Our Finance, Corporate Affairs, the kind of similar things that you would have. But as I said, what's critical about this is that we're at all times looking to make sure that we do what it is we're supposed to be doing: assessing applications, maintaining the register of charities, running a contact centre to ensure that we can respond to queries, assessing concerns that we receive, making sure that we're pursuing investigations if they're required, carrying out inquiries, drafting guidance materials. You'll all be familiar with those on our website. Also research, and yesterday we had a piece of research which I'm going to touch on because it specifically relates to smaller charities. So I'm going to assume there's a number maybe of smaller charities in the room tonight. So that's an interesting piece of research, and hopefully it'll teach you a little bit more about the sector that you're part of, and also the fact that it's very much recognised the massive contribution that smaller charities make. And that's part of the reason why we did this piece of research, because we wanted the wider public to understand that there is, almost 48% of Irish registered charities are what are called smaller charities, and even micro charities. Micro would be where you've got income of under 10,000, and smaller where you've got income under 100,000. And it was really to draw out and to draw a picture for the public and for yourselves about what that entails and the massive contribution that you make. So, in terms of our own vision, we talk about this a lot, and you would have seen we've done research on trust and confidence, and that's because it's very much about having a vibrant, trusted charity sector that is valued for the public benefit that it provides. And also, how do we do that in terms of our mission? Well, it's to regulate charities in the public interest, and that is a critical part of what we do. Everything we do has to be in the public interest. So, for example, when Thomas will be talking about concerns, it's very much in the public interest. So we make it clear that where concerns are raised with us, it's not about the individual raising the concern, it's about the concern itself. And that's the prism that we look at it through. So as I said, it's to regulate the charity in the public interest, and how we do that? Well, by ensuring that people comply with charity law, and also supporting best practice in the governance and administration of charities. So that's the focus tonight. It's about that practical governance piece. So as I said, we have to make sure that we work with what we have as an organisation, the exact same as yourselves as charities. There's lots of things we would love to do, but with a public body and a very specific budget, we have to target our resources at the things that we think will have the greatest impact in terms of regulating the sector, and ultimately in terms of driving public trust and confidence. And I'm going to come back to that, because particularly when it comes to smaller charities who are mainly reliant more reliant than the larger charities on donations, that trust and confidence that people can have in you is really, really important to the success of your organisations. So again, like yourselves, we have a strategy, and we do it on a 3-yearly basis. And this will set out what we're going to do. So everything that we do each year, we'll have a business planner in this, and we'll be going, right, are we hitting these things that we want to achieve? So, public trust and confidence in registered charities, we're monitoring that by the big surveys that we do. We published the results of some of those earlier this year. Also in terms of ensuring that the public out there are informed donors, so that they're checking the register of charities, doing things like setting up our checkacharity.ie webpage, so that people can go directly into the register and check your organisations out. And that's critical, because obviously you're registered charities, you are working very hard in that space, you are regulated, so it's important, if people aren't registered charities, that they're not holding themselves out to be registered charities. Otherwise, that's their donations that could be going to your organisations. So that's where the compliance and enforcement piece comes in there, to make sure that people understand, saying you're a charity is a protected term, and it's only available to registered charities in Ireland. As I said, we've the regulatory oversight and supervision. I've just touched on that there, but also proportionality. I do appreciate, and I think Declan touched on it there with Thomas, and Thomas's title being Director of Compliance and Enforcement. But part of Thomas's role is about encouraging compliance, and encouraging people to come into compliance, and ensuring also that people are able to comply, so that you have the tools available to you, the guidance available to you, that you understand as charity trustees what you need to do. Because we're not here to catch anybody out. You'll notice that we're not, that you don't have a million prosecutions in the courts at the moment, even though a number of things are offences under our Act. We very much take the approach of working with charities to bring them into compliance, and it's only when that fails, or if we're not assured, that you might see, for example, an investigation. But that is a tiny, tiny percentage of the overall 11,500 registered charities that we have in Ireland. So when we talk about our compliance work, we do try our best to make sure that people understand that there are thousands of charities out there doing amazing work every day and complying with charity law, and it's just the smaller number that we do have to tackle on behalf of the wider sector. So a big thing for us then in terms of our strategy is to make sure we're constantly tracking it. And I was listening to a Carmichael event this morning as part of Charities Trustees Week, and they were talking about impact. And we hear this, it's like a buzzword. Oh, how do you measure your impact? And what was really interesting is how they approached it. It was around your impact managing. And it's not just about deciding we want X and they're being absolutely blind to everything else. And that's very much part of what we do in the charities regulator as well. We have to look and see, are things working and having the impact that we want them to have? So the governance code has been around since 2018, November 2018, so it's 5 years. And that's something that the charity sector has worked with us on. It's very much, I was just talking to Mags, one of our panellists earlier, it's very much a tool for charity trustees. I realise it's a bit unfortunate that the record form is called a compliance record form, but it's very much for yourselves as charity trustees to use it and just track for yourselves and keep a note of where you're at with the governance code. And that's very much the intention around it. So as I've mentioned to you, we've done a number of things. I'm going to finish up now in a moment. I appreciate Thomas is dying to get up here with his presentation. But over, we'll say, the last 12 months, I just wanted to draw a few things to your attention in case you're not aware of them. So we've improved our forms. So some of you will use the portal. So we've improved, for example, the change of purpose form. Now, we are, in the next year or so, going to be going out for a new IT system, so the platform might change slightly, and we are listening to everything that is said to us in relation to our current portal and how it works and the system. It's same for staff of the Charities Regulator. They're working with a system that we definitely think we'd like to see improvements to. But for the moment, we've been able to change some of the forms and take into account some of that feedback that we've had. So change of purpose would be one. If you're changing your constitution, your governing document, obviously you need to let us know, but it's in relation to certain things. It's if you're changing your main object, okay, because that could change whether or not you're a charity. So we just try and make sure that people do that in the right way. If you're changing your winding up clause or your income and property clause, these are things that hopefully you're familiar with in your constitution. It's not about every single tiny change you're making. We're not interested in those. We're just interested in the main ones, and we certainly hope that by focusing those, we can speed up the process. And we've got more guidance materials. Classification standard, that's a really, really important one, and I'm going to have an ask for everybody at the end of this in relation to that. Also more research. The reason we do the research is, as I said, to inform the sector, to make sure that policymakers out there who are making decisions in relation to your sector have data and information available to them, that you have it available to you so you understand your sector and can talk to people about it, and also that we can understand what's actually going out there, because we very much take an evidence approach to how we regulate. So this is something from the report that we published yesterday, which is in relation to Ireland's smaller charities. And what I wanted to highlight here really is actually this one over here, which is the smaller charities, and in particular the orange section there. So that shows you the extent to which smaller charities are reliant on donations. And you compare that to a much smaller slice when it comes to charities more generally, okay? And then you'll see the blue one there. The blue is public funding. So smaller charities, you tend to rely less on state funding, which means you're even more reliant on those donations. And actually, almost half of the charities that are smaller charities get no public funding at all. So this is why public trust and confidence, and making sure that you're as transparent as you can by filing your annual report on time, by making sure that information on the register is correct. That's why it's so important to your charity, because what we saw in our survey is that the Irish public have the highest level of trust and confidence in smaller, local, community-based charities. And that's a real positive. It gives you a real edge if you're a smaller charity. But at the same time, it's a challenge to make sure that you're as transparent as you can be. Because what the public very clearly said to us is they want to know where the donations are going, whether it's people's time, whether it's money that people are giving or goods. And that's all available through the annual report on our website when you file that each year. So that's really just, I suppose, encouraging people to do it. This is the new report, an overview of Ireland's smaller charities, and that's available on our website. So I'm just going to finish up here with two asks, and the first one is to check your charity's entry on the register, and you can use that address I said there, which is checkacharity.ie. Because we often find, or in some cases we find, that charity trustees they assume somebody else has made a filing for them, whether it's an accountant, whether it's a member of staff if you're lucky enough to have staff, or a volunteer. But it's absolutely essential that you check that, because at the end of the day, it's you as charity trustees that are responsible for making sure it's filed on time. You'll also spot as well whether any of your details are incorrect. Really, really important. We have a new form of a charity details form. It only takes a few minutes to fill out. Please, if you see anything incorrect, do update it, fill out that form and submit it to us, and we can update the register then with the correct details. The final thing I would say is the classification form. So we are trying to get more research and greater insight into what you do as charities and what the wider sector is doing. And the classification form is really important. So at the moment, you could be sitting beside somebody who's a similar charitable purpose to you. Maybe it's advancing education, or maybe it's the prevention of poverty or economic the prevention of economic hardship or poverty. But actually that doesn't really tell you. You could be doing completely different things in that same space. And what the classification form allows you to do is drill down a little bit into a little bit more detail and tell the public in more detail exactly what you're doing. And it's really, really important. So I would ask you, there's guidance on our website. It takes a couple of minutes to fill out the form, but we would really, really appreciate if everybody here and online could fill out that form for us. And it's all for the benefit of the sector. So I'm going to pass over to Thomas now. And so Thomas Mulholland is our Director of Compliance and Enforcement. And he looks quite scary now, the way he's walking up here. But he's not at all. Thanks, Thomas.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much. So maybe I'll just address the scary bit first. So people do say to me, the charities regulator, obviously I'm the Director of Compliance and Enforcement, but I do think every single day, and I'm not just saying this, I do think every single day about charities and the amount of volunteer work that charities do. And that is part of the way that we deal with charities. We totally recognise that. And by way of example, what I would say is the vast majority of letters we issue from our unit, the compliance unit, are to charities on a volunteer basis, believe it or not. Well over 90%, 98% I'd say of letters we out to charities say, look, there's an issue, here's some correspondence, and we get into a correspondence and we address the issue. It's very rare, less than one a week I would say, where we issue a statutory demand, use our powers under the Act. So I just want to say, in relation to the scary bit, I'm absolutely aware that charities and the volunteer work that they do. So in relation to my presentation, the first thing is governance. And often I hear the word governance in relation to charities, and I wonder that people really stop to think about what it means. And so what does it mean? Well, we have a charities governance code that's available on the website that sets out, the details of, how a charity should be governed. It's a simple, standard governance document for, a small charity. So it involves the putting into place systems and processes so that your charity achieves its charitable purpose with integrity and is managed in an effective, efficient, accountable and transparent way. So that's what governance means. It means that you want to run your charity in a proper way that's open and transparent so that everybody can see and understand this is what we're trying to achieve, this is how we're achieving it, and that we're accountable to our donors, to our stakeholders. And what I would say in relation to governance, it comes from the top down, so that the charity trustees are absolutely crucial in creating a culture of good governance, of transparency, and encouraging that in every facet of the operation of the charity. And it has to be clear that charity trustees make decisions in relation to a charity. So what is a charity trustee? For most charities, the majority of charities now are companies. So in a company you have directors. I think people would understand that. A company, you have directors who control a company. If a charity, if its legal form is a company, then the directors are called charity trustees. So in the charities regulator, we wouldn't refer to the directors of the company. We would refer to the charity trustees of the charity. Okay, so that's what it means. If the legal form is not a company, it may be an association. It's normally made up of the board. They have a chairperson probably and a treasurer, a secretary. The people who are in control are the charity trustees, and they make the decisions in relation to a charity. They're responsible for running the charity, for putting good governance in place. So that's obviously an important role that charity trustees are making these decisions, and I know it's difficult. I understand that running a charity is not easy, and I admire people who act as charity trustees for charities, because it's very often a thankless task, or you're doing a lot of good work that perhaps isn't recognised by a lot of people. So I do recognise that charity trustees have to make decisions, and they can be hard decisions. And what I would always say about any decision that a charity trustee would think, if they're making one, is if this decision was made public, if everybody in the world were to know we are making the decision here at this meeting today, and they had all the same information as we have here, would I be prepared to stand over that decision? So, kind of like I used to give the example of a postcard. So if you're writing the decision on a postcard and sending it through the post, but a lot of people these days, some of my daughters might understand what a postcard is. It's Facebook or whatever now. So what I mean is, if it becomes publicly available, are you prepared to stand over the decision? Now, I'm not saying you have to get everybody in the world to agree with your decision, because we're not, you know, there's a room full of people here. I'd say it's going to be very difficult for us to, more than 3 of us, to agree to anything, you know. So I'm not saying you have to make everybody agree with it, but you have to be able to stand over your decision and say, this is why we made this decision, here's the reasons for it. You can either disagree or agree with it, but that's the way it. So the standard I always have is, you know, the little phrase I have there, which I've stolen from the internet, is sunshine is the best disinfectant, electric light is the most efficient policeman. And what that means is what I mean by sunshine is the best disinfectant is, if all information is available, if everybody can see it, it makes it more transparent. You know, and I always give the example of, say, for your financial statements for a charity. Somebody wants to see financial statements, show them the financial statements. I don't understand why a charity, which gets its money from the public, would not want to let everybody in the world see their financial statements. Your trustees, your charity trustees, are they on your website? Why not? Why would you not want to put the charity trustees on the website to say, here's the people who run the charity, here's the people who should be taking credit for the good work we're doing in this charity. You know, it should be publicly available, transparent. And, you know, so that's what I mean there in relation to that little phrase. So one of the key things I think in relation to governance is your charitable purpose. And, you know, sometimes we see charities who are maybe slightly lost sight of what their original charitable purpose is. So sometimes it's worth going back, reading your constitution, your governing document, and seeing what was this charity originally set up for? What was the original charitable purpose? And you have to remember, under the Charities Act, which is, you know, the legislation we operate under, a charity can carry out a charitable purpose only. Okay, so you can't have a kind of a half charity, half, you know, something else. Can only be charity, can only carry out a charitable purpose. And charity trustees, they should make no apologies for setting high standards. There's, you know, we all strive to achieve the highest standards, you know, and you know, your charity should seek to do that. So charities, you know, all trustees must, you know, should look to act with integrity. And why? Because for the name of your charity and for the entire charity sector, we often see it, you know, where there's, you know, a bad news story about a charity. It doesn't just affect that charity, it can affect the sector as a whole. So, you know, it's incumbent on us all who are involved in the sector to do our best to act with integrity in relation to good governance and in relation to charities. So what issues can arise? So, like I say, I'm Director of Compliance Enforcement, Charities Regulator, so like I say, I do get to see some of the, you know, the issues that arise, and, you know, they can be varied and complex. So I'm going to give a couple of examples here of you know, issues that have arisen, and it's just to kind of give you a flavour of, you know, what can arise and how they're dealt with. You know, so, you know, kind of some of the safeguards I would put in place in relation to any charity is that, you know, there should be regular board meetings attended by charity trustees. Has to be meetings of the board on a regular basis, okay, to take, you know, to discuss issues and to make decisions. Has to be meetings. Is there an agenda and the papers are circulated in advance? So it just makes it easy. If everybody gets to see the papers and stuff and the questions in advance, they can be ready for the meeting. And, you know, it just makes the meetings easier and more transparent. There should be standard items on the agenda. So the agenda should be kind of similar every month. You know, should have opened up, you know, have we a quorum, you know, minutes of the last meeting, conflicts of interest, how's the finances, you know, we should be looking at that at every meeting. So you could have kind of a standard agenda. I'm not going to say it has to be exactly the same for every meeting, but should be similar. And then the key thing is the minutes of the meeting. They're written down on paper or recorded on your computer or whatever. The minutes of the meeting and the decisions that were taken. What did we decide at the meeting? Are we all agree? And, you know, this is what was decided. Okay. Now, and like I said earlier on, it doesn't have to be agreed by everybody. You know, these things. You know, but what was eventually decided? What did we? You know, at the end of the discussion, this is what we decided to do. So, like I say, decisions should be taken by the trustees. A charity trustee is entitled to ask for information about any issue within the charity. Okay, so, you know, that sometimes can cause friction in charities where one of the trustees asks questions. Asking questions is good. You know, if somebody asks a question, you have to think about, well, why are they raising this issue? And, you know, it would be a matter for, you know, for a board of charity trustees, there should be, you know, you have to kind of get, as a charity trustee, there has to be kind of a balance between cooperation and discussion. So you can't just agree with everything, that, you know, just nod your head and say, oh yes, that's great. But then at the other end of the scale, you know, if everybody spends too long, you know, disagreeing about everything, nothing gets done. So it has to be kind of a happy medium, which I recognise is not easy. I do recognise that, you know, these things, you know, they can take time, they can be difficult. So like I say, here's a couple of examples of charities that we've dealt with. So this is one situation that came to our attention. A new charity trustee joined a charity. Now this charity had been very long established, okay, had been in existence for many, many years, way before the charities like there, probably even before the state was founded. So this charity had been around for a long time, had substantial funds. And one of the committees in the charity was this investment committee. And this investment, it was a subcommittee of the board, okay? But it seemed to be making all the decisions. And the new charity trustee was asking, well, why is this subcommittee making decisions about payments? Should we not be ultimately making the payments? And they were kind of told, well, no, this is the way it's always been. You know, it's always been like that. So when this was brought to our attention, we looked at the constitution. Now, like I say, this particular charity, had been around for a long time, and the constitution was quite dated. So it was somewhat difficult to read, and you know, this may be where, you know, a charity maybe get legal advice or whatever. But it seemed to be that this subcommittee was just merely advisory. It was just, you know, to provide advice to the board. So when we raised queries with the charity trustees, it was clear from their correspondence that they had kind of lost sight of what their charitable purpose was. Remember I said it earlier on, charity should always be clear in its charitable purpose. What is it we've been set up for? And kind of over this time, this particular charity had kind of, you know, with mission creep, kind of, you know, had kind of slightly strayed from what it was doing, you know, because there hadn't been a focus for a long time when somebody's standing back saying, why are we established? What is it we're trying to achieve again? So with the benefit of legal advice and our correspondence, the charity, you know, undertook that process. You know, they reviewed the constitution, and it was clear that the subcommittee was only advisory, and so they put a strategy in place to deal with all that, and so it was all resolved. So, and like I say, like that case there, that was all entirely voluntary. You know, the charity, there was correspondence into, in fairness to them, when they looked at, you know, the way they were set up, they said, look, maybe it's right. We'll have a review of what we're doing. And you know, it was all eventually cleared up. So the second one here, this is a slightly different example. It's an animal welfare charity. It was set up as a small charity and expanded very rapidly. It was, what actually happened was it became a bit of a hit online. You know, some YouTuber or whatever mentioned about this charity, and they got a lot of donations as a subsequent to that. And you know, it kind of expanded more than they had been kind of planning, if you know what I mean. So they expanded quite rapidly, and you know, there was some, when we were dealing with it then, you know, one of the charities was the original founder. Their property was being used by the charity. You know, they were also a member of the charity. So there's a few phrases there I'm after using, so we'll need to be clear on it. So a charity trustee, like I said, is earlier on, is a person who is, you know, operating, who's in control of the charity. A member, again, under a charity, if you look at your constitution, it would usually set out who the members are. And the members are very important, okay, because members can ultimately appoint or remove the charity trustees. Norm, depending on the constitution of the charity. So it's important to be aware of who the members of the charity are, okay? And even if you look at your financial statements, if you get your financial statements audited, you'll see at the top of the audit report, it will say, audit report to the members of the charity. If you ever notice that, it's only one line in the actual financial statements, and it says, but the auditor is not reporting to the trustees, not reporting to the charity, he's reporting to the members of the charity. So that's what, you know, how important a member is. The auditor is actually reporting to the member of the charity. And then there's volunteers, and a volunteer is obviously, you know, what we understand to be a volunteer, somebody who just comes in, does whatever work that has to be done. So, you know, there's just a few phrases there, and it's clear. I'm just, you know, people need to understand what the different roles are. Charity trustee, a member, a volunteer, an employee, you know. So in this particular charity, that had, like I say, you know, charity funds had been used to buy Christmas gifts. The employees' roles and the volunteers' roles were unclear. The minutes of meetings were a bit, you know, inadequate. They didn't really record what was going on. When we actually called out to this charity, and it was clear the charity was, you know, had good intentions, you know, was probably, you know, doing the right thing, but just the structures just weren't 100% in place, you know. So, you know, we engaged with the charity. The founder, you know, agreed to, you know, step back and let, you know, the other charity trustees act. And in this particular case, there were people, I know we all hear about charities, it gets very hard to get charity trustees. In this particular case, there was people willing to act as charity trustees. They were able to come into place. And structures were put in place, a legal agreement was put in place in relation to the property, and new trustees were appointed, and they had experience of board meetings. So again, they had we following up with them. We could see there was scheduled board meetings, papers in advance, improved financial procedures, travel expense claims were all put in, and it was clear that the charity put in the structures that were required. Now, I'm not saying that was easy or that happened overnight. It didn't. There was a bit of time where we worked with the charity. But, they were willing to do that, and eventually, they came into compliance, which, as I said, is what all of us want, charities to work in compliance with the Charities Act. So that's a quick run through on my presentation. The last bit I'm always coming back to is it always comes back to governance. That's the issue in all charities, where people, the control of the charity, and as charity trustees, you are in control. So that's the end of my presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Thomas. That's Thomas Mulholland, Director of Compliance with the and enforcement with the charities regulator. The enforcement bit is important as well. And thank you both to Thomas and to Helen. And I might ask you both to take a place at the table here, and we'll ask our panel as well, members of our panel, because we're also joined locally by Cathy Darmody, who's the chair of Johnstown Crosspatrick Galmoy Community First Responders, and Margaret Whelan, who's the chair of Kilkenny Volunteer Centre, and they, together with Helen Martin and Thomas Mulholland, will be your panel for this evening. And we hope that you will have, from what you heard and from the two contributors so far and from your own experience, you'll have some questions for them. And I want to say welcome to the panel and thank you very much for taking part this evening. And maybe if I could set the ball rolling and give people a chance maybe to gather their thoughts, could I ask to put our volunteer trustees on the spot from the start, to Mags and Cathy. What good governance practices would you have in place in your organisations that have helped your charity to perform better? And maybe would you have any examples of the differences that they've made to your operation?
Who wants to
go
for
first?
it? Launch in. Well, I suppose as chair of the Volunteer Centre, we're associated with Volunteer Ireland, and we were very fortunate from that perspective. I know not every charity has that. So we had a guiding hand from the get-go and from the inception of the Volunteer Centre in 2021. We were kind of guided through the process, so to speak, in developing the centre, targeting specific roles for board members. So it was very much a targeted recruitment process. We are obviously a registered charity. We have the Charities Code. And as Helen and I we were discussing that earlier on, I was just saying to Helen, well, I'm not getting up here chapter and verse and saying, well, chapter 1, section 2. I don't know it off by heart by any manner of means, but I do know where it is, and we do regularly review our procedures, our protocols. We have a litany, quite frankly, of protocols and procedures in place, such as a risk protocol, conflict of interest policy, health and safety policy, board induction, all of the above. So we would regularly assess where we're at, if they need to be reviewed, if they need to be changed, because over time, our strategic plan, we have a 3-year strategic plan, we have an annual plan. They're live documents. They change all the time, and with that, the risk changes. So we're constantly reviewing.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Mags, and apologies maybe for jumping straight in and rather than asking you about the organisation, and we'll get a chance to do that in a moment. But Cathy Darmody, Cathy, you're the chair of Johnstown Crosspatrick Galmoy Community First Responders. Do you want to tell us a tiny bit about that before I ask you to tell us about the meat and drink of being a charity?
So our group is responsible. I guess you could call us a volunteer branch of the National Ambulance Service. So what we do is when somebody dials in and asks for an ambulance, at the same time that the paramedics are informed of what the issue might be, we're also contacted and given the information. So the idea behind it is we would attend to those individuals within our locality to try and give them whatever assistance we can while we're waiting for the ambulance. And because what we attend to are cardiac-related issues, breathing-related issues, they are life-threatening situations. So hopefully the fact that we're there early will help prevent things from progressing further along the way. We are a very small group. We're listening to Helen earlier. We would be one of those micros. So there are 7 members within our team, and we have 2 additional gentlemen who are advanced paramedics that live locally and will come out on calls with us when they are available. I would love to say that we got 10,000 a year. We definitely require and rely upon the local businesses, our community members to try and support us in what we do.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. And Mags, you're chair of the Volunteer Centre here in Kilkenny, and while volunteer centres have been established around the country in many places for quite a while, it's quite a new organisation here in Kilkenny, so obviously you had the experience of getting established relatively recently.
We did, Declan, in point of fact, it was 2020, August of 2020, when I was approached initially from Volunteer Ireland about the development of the centre, and my day job at the time was the coordinator for the Public Participation Network, the PPN, and part of, through what is known as the Local Economic Community Plan, which is the Bible for community groups here locally. An action within that was that the PPM would help drive the development of a new centre here in Kilkenny. We were one of 7 in the country that started out in 2020, 2021. So it is relatively new. We had a volunteer service here in Kilkenny which was run by the Leader Partnership for some time. So there was a database to begin with. But certainly the whole process, and I'm being straight and honest with you, when I started out I was all gung-ho, but then I was thinking, oh my God, the litany of work we have to go through. But that's I'm stating it here now, that's a perception. Because when we did get started, the amount of tools and resources that are there, the amount of people, points of contact that you can turn to assist you with this, it's phenomenal. And it's consistent, like I have to be honest, Helen, and I will say that about even, you know, the charities code, like it's improved year on year based on the feedback that they're getting. And we have noticed that in Kilkenny ourselves. The volunteer service here in Kilkenny, I mean, we're there to enhance the experience of volunteering at a county level, both for an organisation that is looking for volunteers, but also from the individual perspective as well. We kicked off in 2021, and of course straight into a recession, pardon the pun, the pandemic. So it was trying, but I think you know we served a purpose then, actually, in point of fact. So it worked out really well. But yeah, we're babies on the block, so to speak.
Okay, thanks a million, Mags. And we'll take questions in just a moment. If I can put it back to yourself, Kathy, just that question I asked at the outset about the good governance practices that your group, small as it is, have in place and how they've helped your group to perform.
Well, similarly, we have the Code of Conduct, we've got our Constitution, we also have a safeguarding of vulnerable adults and children policy, but I think the one document that probably has influenced us the most was a risk register. So what we have done is to look at, by virtue of what our members do, they are being sent out into situations that are unknown and unknowable. So we try to look at every possibility from the beginning of the call when they get that information from the ambulance service right through to the point when they have returned home after being out and are now safe and sound again. What are all of the vulnerabilities that they might face? And we, from there, realized that we needed to develop policies and procedures to be able to keep that easily understood and to be able to communicate it. Once we had that, we then went a little bit further and said, right, we need to now have some means of explaining that information to our team members. So we created an induction program for new members in order to make sure that they fully understood what they needed to do to keep themselves safe, to keep their patients safe, to keep the team safe. But then we said that's the new members. We also have to do something for our existing members. So we created a guidebook that walked everybody through every process and procedure that we had developed. And we're now in the process of trying to pass that information on to other community first responders teams around the country. So the National Ambulance Service has a Moodle platform where you can go in, and it's a communication tool as well as a training tool. So I'm involved with our community engagement officer in creating a training package so we can then pass on that information to all teams around the country to say, here's some training information that might be of benefit to you.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. That's very impressive for such a small organisation. Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have representatives from a lot of charities and not-for-profits here in the room, so would anyone like to raise a query with the panel here? If you just raise your hand, we have microphones on the right and left of the room, and it'd be lovely to get questions related to your experience. You have one over here? Okay.
We have one actually from online,
okay,
and it relates to it's a comment that Tom actually made in his presentation, and probably very topical at this time of year. The presenter referred to Christmas gifts to staff in a charity appeared to be of some concern. Is staff support at Christmas, say, small gifts and a meal not allowed? Does the regulator have any guidance on this? And this person also goes on to ask, is there any advice available regarding the payment of expenses to volunteers?
Okay, so there's a couple of different issues there. So first of all, in relation to gifts, when the way I would look at that is, if you're a charity and you're collecting money on the street in a bucket, and people are throwing money into the bucket, okay, when they donate that money into the bucket, they would expect that money would be spent on the charity achieving its charitable purpose, whether that's helping the sick people or the relief of poverty, whatever it is. They don't. I would suspect that the person donating that money, wouldn't expect that money would be given as a gift to somebody by the charity. So that's what in relation to that. And sorry, Jared, what was the second part of it?
Is there any advice available regarding the payment of expenses to volunteers?
Yeah. Okay. So payment of expenses. So again, expenses comes up regularly, and what we would say to any charity is, if you stick with revenue guidelines on that. So revenue, they will have on their website, they've got expense claim forms, what they should look like, the amounts allowable. They have rates, civil service rates. They would be the norm, for expenses for anybody in the charity. But what I would say to it, the most important thing is, they would have to be recorded properly, exactly like revenue would expect. A proper filled out expense claim form, and probably the most important thing is it has to be signed off by somebody else. So where we see issues is where somebody's got expense claim form, maybe to fill it out, they're signing it off and they're authorising the payment to themselves. No, there has to be a division of duties there. So one person, whoever's making the claim, somebody else has to be signing off and authorising the payment. And if for example the charity has got is lucky enough to have staff and it's got a CEO or whatever, the CEO can't sign off on their own. It would have to go to the board. So somebody always has to sign off on their expense claim. But there's no issue with somebody claiming expenses in the charity. They're entitled to their expenses if they're business related or charity related to the charity. There's no issue there.
Thanks, Thomas. That's a fairly comprehensive answer, and really, I think it's very clear when you talk about it. It's when people put the money in the bucket, they don't expect it, to be going out to somebody rather than going to the cause. Lady here at the front, we'll get a microphone to you now. If you could identify yourself, please, that'd be great.
Thank you. I'm Breatha Raggett, and I'm from the Irish Country Women's Association. I'm a member here in Kilkenny for over 52 years, and I thank you for your presentation. It was lovely, great. the people you have from the organisation, everything is hunky-dory. They're new organisations, and what you didn't mention at all is what happens when an organisation gets into difficulty. Nothing on your presentation covered that area, and I don't know, but if people are unhappy, if members of a paid membership organisation are unhappy and see things changing, I don't know what the remit is of the charities regulator. Do you take on helping the board? Do you take on helping the members? Who knows what the procedure is, or the whole thing is just so difficult. When you're a member, you're trying to do your best, you write in, you give it as honestly as you can. Of course, you're always acknowledged, and there it stops. You don't know as a member what you have said. Do you in turn then go and deal with the board of the organisation? Do you understand what I'm saying? And we have nobody here tonight from an organisation who has survived a situation like that.
Okay, well, if I can respond to that, there's a few different issues there, okay? So talking about charities in general, and I think I did mention in my presentation, I recognise that a charity, any charity, is difficult to run, and difficulties can arise in any charity. If dispute arises, we're all human beings, and people, either get on or sometimes they don't get on, okay? And that can happen in a charity as well, the same as any other walk of life, a family, a business, disputes arise. In relation to any concerns we receive, the charities regulator, we have a concerns policy and how concerns are treated and dealt with. And as Helen mentioned in her presentation, the charities regulator acts in the public interest. So whatever concern comes in, we have to look at that concern. We have to get information in relation to it from the concernee, perhaps, and then we raise it with the charity. And as in my presentation, like I said, those interactions can take time, and there's back and forth between the charities regulator and the charity. And ultimately, it's hoped that all those issues can be reserved or can be resolved in time. So that's the way that concerns are handled in a charities regulator.
And just say generally as well that we do make it very, very clear if in our concerns policy. So there's 11,500 charities. It is not for the charities regulator to act as a referee in terms of internal disputes that happen in charities. It's very much the role of the board of charity trustees who have the control of the organisation to ensure that they've got governance in place, and particularly in relation to membership organisations. And I'm just making this in general, I can't comment on specific cases. We couldn't possibly be there to try and resolve all these issues in 11,500 charities. It's not our role, it's not what we're there to do. What we are there to do, though, is to ensure that there's guidance there for people to do the right thing. And where the right thing isn't being done, that's where it's of concern to us more generally. So that would be where good governance is clearly not in place, or we've concerns around that. And we get hundreds of concerns each year. Not all of them, and I always say this to the media when I'm talking to them, not all of them relate to registered charities, okay? Some of them relate to other types of organisations. So in the context, that's quite a small number, but it's a very big number, obviously, for an organisation of our size. And the thing about all of those concerns that we get in is they'll come generally from members of the public or people who may have been involved in charities, and they can come in, they can also come in as well anonymously. In that case, it can be quite difficult, we can't follow up. But the thing about it is, we will always acknowledge the concern that's received. We're not there to provide a running commentary, unfortunately. We're not able to for the person who raised it with us. But what we absolutely will do is when it has been resolved, because a concern will not close until it has been resolved in some way with the charity. And in that case, we will, in general terms, inform the person who's raised the concern with us of the outcome of those inquiries and of the work that we've done. And I absolutely appreciate that there's a frustration there, and I know that myself, if you know, in the past, or if you're raising something with a public body and you don't hear back or you don't feel it's been listened to. But as a statutory regulatory body, we are absolutely bound by principles of fair procedures, you know, by confidentiality in relation to certain information that's provided to us. And while there's an absolute desire for people to know what's going on, there is what's in the public interest and what's interesting to the public. And we have to be very, very careful that what we do safeguards the process for everybody. So in other words, that we do properly investigate things, that we see where the facts are leading us. What do the facts say when we're requesting information for people? We can't make a judgment based on what someone is saying, but at the same time, we do look at every concern that comes into us. So that's really, I suppose, where Thomas is coming from in terms of the process overall. But in terms of what we look at and what we don't look at, that's available in our concerns policy. And the reason why we published that, one of the first early documents that we published, is that we did want to manage public expectations about what we can do and what we can't do, and what we can't do by reason of the fact that it's not within our statutory remit to do it. But certainly where the concerns relate to governance, you know, lack of financial controls, we will absolutely follow those things and make sure that we follow up.
Thanks, Helen and Thomas and Breda. Thank you very much for your question. And any other questions? And just a reminder that obviously the panel can't address specifics to do with the charity, but if it's a question relating to a general issue, of course. Yeah, over here, John.
Hi there, I'm Nicola Veazey. I'm here on behalf of Makar Animal Rescue. And can I just reiterate, thank you for this. We've had a tough year this year. We've actually employed a consultant to help us through the full process of becoming fully compliant. And it has been a minefield. It's been a real eye-opener, but I'm pleased to say that we're there. One of the issues that I came aboard there, we're actually set up as a limited company, limited by guarantee. So we have directors, of which I am one. But we do have then the trustees and extended members. Now, we are in a small town, we're in Thurles, so it's a fairly small town. The trustees and the members have been together. Members have come and gone in very small numbers. My question is, when we were going through the process of making sure we were fully compliant, there came a question mark as to the term of a chairperson. And had we got something in our constitution? So we have, and the term is 9 years. However, and we've always had AGMs, even from our inception, the same person keeps getting voted in. That we all resign, and the same person keeps getting voted in. Is that okay? Like, if I was to refuse the role, then basically, I've stepped back every year. And every year we sit down and I get nominated again as chairperson. Last year I did sort of say, come on, is there anybody else in the room who wants to step up to the plate? And I was told no. So is there something we can put in place? It does say 9 years in our constitution. However, we have added a document to say that we have looked at it. We've put it onto the assessment. Yeah, so we've put it on there and said, you know, we've actually recorded that this is what's happened. Is that okay? I mean, I'm not going to get anybody coming to me and saying, why are you doing this? It's just I keep getting voted in.
I know, and actually it's funny you should say that, because I actually had someone say that to me the other day. They were talking to me, they're a chair and they're in the exact same position. They can't get someone else. Actually, I think it came up in one of the questions maybe on the webinar yesterday. But there's just a couple of things I just wanted to mention there. The people who are directors of the company, if you're a company limited by guarantee, they're the trustees.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So there's no other trustees, just to be clear on that. Yeah. The directors are legally the only trustees. Right, okay, I wasn't sure whether you were saying there were two things there. The other thing is that in relation to the term limits, there's a 9 year is mentioned in the Charities Governance Code, and that is best practice. practice, okay? So the governance code is a mix of best practice and legal requirements.
Right.
The 9 years is not a legal requirement,
Right, okay.
okay? It is best practice. And what I would say to everybody is what we've seen, now this would be based on a small enough assessment of what we've done so far in terms of the governance code. It's a small enough sample. We have seen that when, for example, you look at declarations and the accuracy of declarations in relation to the code, we've noticed initially that there does seem to be a correlation between inaccurate declarations and charities where the term of the trustees is longer, considerably longer than 9 years. And what that maybe indicates is that there's kind of a level of comfort maybe there. There might not be enough challenge on the board. And these are the kind of things, I think that's why it's best practice for someone for 9 years. But to answer your question, or I hope this assists anyway, is that happens a lot with charity trustees, particularly in smaller and local groups where nobody wants to step up. And I think the best way to deal with that, or maybe one of the ways to deal with it, is to say, look, there's a 9-year term limit. Have you done 9 years on it? No.
Yeah.
You have. Then I would, that's the thing I would say, look, we have to get a new chair. There's a term limit. It's best practice. It's in the Charities Governance Code. But also, is it possible to go outside of your current board? Because this is another thing. Sometimes in the past, people have said to me, "Oh, can't get charity trustees." I said, "Well, what have you tried?"
It is really difficult, especially in a small town.
Yeah.
It is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
I would agree with you.
We've been going since 2010. Okay.
Yeah.
And we've had people come and go. Not many. I hasten to add that the core people have been with us for years. So it's really difficult. It's really, really difficult to get volunteers as well. We actually, although we're a tiny charity, monetary-wise, we would be not minuscule.
Yeah.
Because we do have quite a high turnover, most of which is funded by 2 charity shops. But even to get people to volunteer, it is virtually nigh on impossible. They maybe come in, they might do an hour, then they'll disappear, or they come and because it's an animal-based charity, they think it's playing with fluffy puppies all day. They don't, they'll come when they might come when it's sun shining, and then you don't get them.
If I could interrupt.
It's really difficult.
Sorry, but thanks, but we want to get to a few more questions. Unfortunately, the hour has gone by quite quickly, and we promised people a relatively concise meeting, and we have another question over here, so thank you.
Dennis Fahy, Secretary of Care Development Association, of which we have a staff of 22, and we also have 2 government agencies, FOSS, for example, and Pobble, and we're responding to their compliance. The difficulty, and I concur totally with the points made by the previous speaker, the difficulty that we faced in care development was succession planning. And there's a specific item on the agenda, and we had to go on hunt for people, particularly retirees. You might think that they had plenty of time in their hands, but in actual fact, they've already planned their retirement. So it's not an assumption. It's not an assumption. So I'd suggest that you put succession planning as an item on the agenda and encourage people to, and have no hesitation, in my experience anyway, no hesitation in asking somebody and explain to them. And if they can bring a skill to the table, all the better. The other thing, Chair, is the whole issue of volunteerism. I find it absolutely, it's just prior to the pandemic, we were making certain headway as regards getting volunteers. But since the pandemic, everybody has their own agenda, very hard to manage your time and work environment and so forth. So just be patient.
Okay, thank you, Dennis, for that question. I might ask the panellists, Kathy and Mags, maybe to address those from your own experience in terms of succession and recruitment of volunteers.
Yeah, I think just for the purpose of this, I'm on a number of boards and I sympathise because I got the nickname the Secretary because I ended up the Secretary on every committee and board that I've ever been on. But that being said, just getting to the nub of this issue, there is certainly an issue in relation to the recruitment of volunteers because the general attitude, and I can understand it, I can affiliate with what the mindset is that I have a full-time job. I'm certainly not taking on an unpaid full-time job in the afternoon as well. But I do think we have a duty, like we're heavily involved, obviously all of us here in our communities and organisations within our communities in a voluntary capacity, and there's value to be had from that. I wouldn't be doing it if not. There's value to wider benefit to the community from a social perspective, depending on the organisation that you're involved with, but also for yourself as an individual. And I think what you need to do, and I would say for yourself and you know, anyone that is having trouble recruiting to the board, sit down, do an exercise, sit down on a Saturday morning, come together on a Saturday morning over a cup of tea or have breakfast somewhere and identify where you're currently at. Identify the skill sets really and truly that you need at the table and be truthful with yourself. Say, well, do I actually have that particular skill set or what am I bringing to the table? And then say, right, we're going to put on an active drive. Who do I know with that particular skill set? And go out and ask them. Because I'm telling you now, I have found that to work, particularly since the pandemic, with other committees that I've been on. I've actively had to go out and say, will you come on board and give us a hand with this? But I always, it's a bit of a lie, I'm saying it now out in public, but I always say, you don't have to stay on it that long. You can stay on for a few weeks. And then I reel them in. But that's, honest to God, I think you have to go out and you have to ask. That may change over time, but for the moment, that's what I would say to you. That is the little bit of work that you do have to do. And target as well, can I say this? Target young people. You know, there's no point in sitting back and thinking they're going to come to the table. They're not. But if you ask them, I promise you they will. It's been my experience anyway. I don't know about yours, Kathy, but
yes,
you
very
know.
much the same thing. Yeah. And again, I sympathise with you. We started in 2016, went live in 2017. I was the chair then. I'm still the chair now. What we actually ended up doing was to write it into our constitution to put in a vice chair, with the idea of the vice. Yeah, but specifically with the idea that the vice chair would take over the role. So there is a limited amount of time to say you're a vice chair for 2 years and the third year you're now taking over. This is your apprenticeship as a vice chair. And then you become, yes, I'm sorry to whoever happens to be vice chair at the moment, but that was the only way that we found that we could actually manage it, was to say there has to be some sort of succession planning. Now, having said that, with such a small team of people, you're basically just bouncing around. So somebody is chair this year and somebody's secretary, and then the chair becomes the treasurer, and you know, it's just the nature of the beast.
We've been blowing around the trumpet. We've been really successful as a charity, and we've grown from strength to strength. And there is an adage to say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah. If you've got a good team, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, panel. And time is a Guinness. I'm afraid we're heading almost to 8:10, but Geraldine has another query from online.
Can a trustee be allowed to provide a service or product to the charity at cost price, where he or she is willing to do so at a price that's less than normal?
The question was, if you want to come up, there we go.
It says, can a trustee be allowed to provide a service or product to the charity at cost price, where he or she is willing to do so at a price that's less than normal?
Okay, well, maybe I'll deal with this one. So normally, the first protocol there, I would say, if you look at the constitution of your charity, it'll probably say in it that a charity trustee is not allowed to benefit from acting as a trustee. So in then circumstances, no, a charity trustee would not be allowed to provide the services.
And could I just add to that I think it would be really important as practice, you know, a method of practice, to put it on the agenda for each meeting. You know, you have, you know, minutes from the last meeting, matters arising, conflict of interest, third on it. And it refocuses the mind, do you know, but I definitely think it should be on it, and risk should be on your agenda every time as well. Yeah.
Thanks very much. And there's a question here at the front in the room.
Thank you. I just want to ask, how reasonable and flexible will the staff of the Charity Regulation Office be with people who have run into issues and difficulties? I was one of these people who was asked to lend a hand, and I suppose what I've inherited is an absolute mess. And as a public servant of 41 years, you know, I've gone from the situation as a young lad threatening people for planning enforcement, threatening them if they don't pay their rent, their loans. And now I'm encountering all the threats all over again from a bunch of staff, right? And it's challenging. And I know, Mags, you said there's loads of resources there. But it's challenging when you're trying to bring an organisation into a state of compliance in 12 months, what probably should have been done in the previous 5 or 6 years. We're trying to meet the requirements of the Charity Regulator, or the Act, I should say. We're trying to meet the requirements of the approved Voluntary Housing Bodies Regulator. We're trying to meet the requirements of the RTB and Revenue. So I suppose if there's a genuine engagement there, what I'm really asking for is cooperation, flexibility, and reasonableness, now that we're genuinely trying to deal with issues.
Thomas, can I ask you maybe to respond to that in the first instance?
Yeah,
Thank you,
well,
Michael.
I think one of the tenets of the Charities Regulator, and I said it at the start of my presentation, is we do recognise that charities are voluntary, and you know, on the whole, people are trying to do the best. And what I would say is, and I would certainly hope, is that the Charities Regulator would be proportionate in its response to any particular issue that's come to its attention. Now, having said that, you know, I do have to caveat that somewhat in that we are the Charities Regulator, and you know, we are our role is to enforce the Charities Act 2009. And if a charity is not in compliance with the Charities Act 2009, we have to point that out to the charity, and we would expect the charity to rectify that. Now, I absolutely take on board what you're saying, you know, and other people are saying that you're dealing with Charities Regulator, you're dealing with the AHB, you're dealing with Revenue, you know, HR, Health and Safety. You know, I really admire charity trustees for the role they're taking on. But if they are, you know, like I say, the Charities Regulator must enforce the Charities Act 2009. Like I say, we do engage with charities normally on a voluntary basis, but we would ultimately expect the charity to come into compliance if there is if it's not in compliance with the Charities Act, it must come into compliance, and we normally would see that in some kind of a plan put in place by the charity to say, these are the issues, here's where we're addressing them. We would monitor that, and once it got to the conclusion, we would close the concern.
Okay, thanks. And that will be the...
Sorry, Declan, just one. I think there was a gentleman there, he had his hand up for quite some time there.
Okay, I beg your pardon.
Sorry,
thank you. We'll
My
try and
name
keep it as
Parvez
brief as
Bhatt.
possible.
I've been in the charity sector for 55 years now, between the UK and Ireland. I have two questions, and both those questions are actually short questions, and they don't take very much of your time to answer them. One, I was in one of these meetings in Athlone very recently. I think it was earlier this year or late last year. And one of the trustees had asked a question: why is it that it's taking the Charities Regulatory Authority to respond to questions that are raised either in writing or by email or by telephone and can take 6, 7, 8, 9 or 10 months? Has that situation improved? Because at that time, I think the answer that was given was that there was a very high turnover of staff. So I don't know. I mean, I've been in commercial life for 60 years plus. I know why there is a high turnover of staff if it was my organization. So I'm wondering if, one, that is improved. The second question I have, perhaps it can be answered together, is that I think it's nearly a year ago now that the Charities Regulatory Authority had sent out a request for various charities across the country, depending on the dynamics of the geography of the situation, to nominate people to go onto a panel, which is very similar to a policing panel, I presume. A year on, that panel still hasn't been constituted, and every time some of the charities ask what's happening, oh, it's being done and the people who were nominated are being written to. But it's well over a year now. Have you any idea when this is going to happen? And also, who is going to do the selection of the charity trustees who've been nominated to be on this panel? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your question. And that'll be the last question this evening because we're at 8:15, so if I can put that to the panel.
Yeah, no, I'll take that. No, since June 2022, we've been able to recruit our own staff directly, which is great, which has meant that we haven't had that significant turnover. We are still under-resourced on registration. Just picking up on the point last year where there were points made at the meeting, and I actually spoke to all of the people afterwards and I took all the details, and there wasn't that 7, 8, 9 months delay, and we did get back. We did, the people I spoke to anyway, we did get back to, because we absolutely, if there's any issue, I always want to make sure actually is there an issue there. Oh my goodness, what's happening there? So that's the first thing. In terms of your second one, I think maybe what you're referring to is the stakeholder forum. That's been established and there's information published on that. We published on our website who the members are, how it's been set up. We had notes about the first meeting. So that information is all, that's done, and it was transparent, and we had a selection committee that went through and picked. We had an external person and we had a member of our board. That's how people were selected. People were invited to nominate. So we got, I think it was over 70 nominations. And I'll have to ask Ger how many people are actually on the forum now that were selected. 16
There's actually 15 people on the stakeholder forum, and in selecting the members, we endeavoured to ensure that the members we selected actually match the register, so that the profile of the charity sector is reflected in the membership. And there's been 2 meetings. We actually had our second meeting last week.
Yeah, so, and the idea is it's a pilot basis. The people who are on it won't be on it for 2 years. There'll be opportunities for other people to get involved. And what I would say, I've been at both of those meetings, and it's been really positive in terms of really good input from the sector about things like, for example, can we look at the Charities Governance Code and we'll say plain English and the tools that are available. We're absolutely doing that around some of our guidance. And also things around how we approach certain areas. So for example, succession planning or risk as well. Again, plain English, can we give practical examples to people? So already that's certainly paying dividends, I think, certainly from the charities regulator, being able to respond, but also being able to have that really open conversation with people about what their experiences are. And because, as Ger pointed out, we tried to pick a selection that was representative of the sector as a whole, so small charities, medium, charities from different areas. It's not all just one, advancing education, for example, it's from different areas. We're hoping that we'll get a really good spread of good input. And then, as I said, it'll be open again to nominations. So in another year or so, the nominations will go out again, and we'll follow the same process. But it's absolutely transparent. The information is there because we appreciate that people had nominated, so it's only fair that they understand how the process of selection worked, and who is on that committee at the moment. And then the fact that it's pilot. And as I said, we've got some notes about, what was discussed briefly at the different meetings.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for the question. This has been Good Governance in Practice, an overview, an event as part of Trustee Week, brought to you by the Charities Regulator with Volunteer Ireland. Thank you very much indeed for coming along and for attending online. I want to say, and I'd ask you to give a big round of applause to our panel, to Helen Martin, the Chief Executive of the Charities Regulator. Maybe we'll do it at the end. To Thomas Mulholland, the Director of Compliance and Enforcement with the Charities Regulator. To Kathy Darmody, the Chair of Johnstown Crosspatrick Galmoy Community First Responders. Kathy, I hope you don't have to say that too often because it's quite a mouthful.
We've shortened it.
To Margaret, or better known to us as Mags Whelan, the Chair of Kilkenny Volunteer Centre. I'm Declan Gibbons. I didn't mention I'm the Manager of Community Radio Kilkenny City, which is a not-for-profit, not quite a charity just yet. Thank you very much. A round of applause for our panel, please. Thank you for coming tonight and for tuning in online, for your questions and for your attention. We hope it was useful, and thank you and good night.